The quiet one, they didn't notice him at first. The human. He just sat near the back of the shuttle, tucked into a window seat like a shadow. Silent. Motionless. Not even blinking. No one knew when he boarded. The manifest said he was authorized, but no one remembered speaking to him. And yet there he was. Always there. Always quiet. The shuttle was called the Sojourn. It wasn't built for speed or war. It was for peace, a neutral corridor drifting slowly between systems like a floating embassy. Diplomats, scholars, and envoys from 27 species shared its long, curved halls. Ancient races with glowing skin, silicon-based minds humming with thought. Proud, insectoid tacticians, beings of fire, fog, and glass, and one human. Just one. He wore a gray coat. That's what people remembered most. Not his face, not his voice, just the coat, worn at the cuffs, dull, like ash. He always sat in the same spot, never ate, never slept, just stared out the window. The stars moved behind him like memories trying to be forgotten. Some said his name was Eli. Others said it was something older, something unpronounceable. It didn't matter. No one spoke to him, and he didn't speak back. Until day 7. On day 7, the throne emissary noticed him. The throne were not known for kindness. They were large, scaled, and carried their ancestry in their blood, like molten iron. Ambassador Kalor had been on the shuttle for 3 weeks, en route to the galactic summit. Respected, feared. He walked with a limp, wounded in the old wars, but still held the power to command silence with a glance. He passed the human seat, paused, turned. "You," he said, voice like gravel. "You don't belong here." The human said nothing. "You're not listed on the manifest," Kalor continued. "You were not present during initial boarding. You do not participate in any diplomatic function. You are not useful, and humans are not trusted." Still, the human said nothing. Kalor's eyes narrowed. His bodyguard stirred. "Speak," he said. "Defend your presence." The human looked up, slowly. His eyes were wrong, not glowing, not bright, just wrong, not empty but too full, like looking into a well and seeing stars at the bottom. Ancient ones. "No," said the human. That was all. Just that one word. But something happened in the air. Something quiet. Like the sound you hear before a building collapses. Like the breath of a forgotten god. Kalor stepped back. Only half a step, but it was enough. The throne do not retreat. The human looked away again, back to the stars. Like the conversation had ended before it began. The next day, Kalor filed a formal complaint. He demanded the human be removed from the shuttle, that he be turned over to the Throne Council for investigation. He called the human a security risk, a liar, a threat to interstellar peace. Others began to agree. The Krell ambassador spoke next. Then the Galari. Then the Toctel Hive. They shared old records, fragments of warnings, old myths from distant worlds, stories that spoke of humans not as people but as something else, something older than what they pretended to be. One of the elders from the Bled Collective whispered, "We buried them for a reason." No one knew what that meant. Not yet. A tribunal was formed, quick, secret, desperate. It met in a locked chamber, at the center of the shuttle. 12 species. 12 votes. All to decide one question. Should the human be removed? Eli was summoned. He walked into the chamber with no fear. No hesitation. He walked like he had been there before. "You are not welcome," said the Toctel speaker, its words chittering through its jaw. "You are dangerous," said the Gilari, eyes flickering with static. "You are hiding," whispered the Bled elder. "But we remember the shape of you." Eli stood at the center of the room. He said nothing. He just looked around, slowly, carefully, like a sculptor admiring a work not yet finished. Finally, he spoke. "You don't understand what I am?" he said. Kalor snarled. "Then explain it." Eli tilted his head. "You wouldn't survive. The truth." The lights in the chamber flickered. "Tell us anyway," said the Bleed Elder. "We have forgotten much, but not how to be afraid." Eli closed his eyes. For a long time he said nothing. Then he began to speak, and the walls began to bleed. Not blood, not liquid. Something else. Something that wasn't there before. Symbols, warnings, things that shimmered like oil and shadow, ancient shapes that twisted and turned and spoke without sound. Each one mirrored in every delegate's mind. They screamed, one delegate collapsed, another tried to flee and broke their own neck in the process. The rest watched as Eli stepped forward and placed a single hand on the floor. The room went silent. Outside, alarms began to sound. A message rippled through the shuttle's systems, not electronic, not digital, a psychic pulse. A single word burned into every wall, every screen, every mind. Run. In the command deck, systems went dark. Navigation was gone. Propulsion stalled. Time itself seemed to slow. Something ancient had been awakened, and the sojourn had become its cradle. Eli stood in the tribunal chamber alone. The delegates were gone. Not dead, not vanished. Just removed, like dust swept from an old shelf. And outside the room someone was crying. A young technician. She had seen everything through the observation glass. Her name was Laura. She was 22 cycles old. And she had never believed in monsters. She does now. Eli turned toward her, not quickly, not with menace, but gently, like he was sorry. "I didn't want this," he said. She stared at him, too afraid to run, too afraid to breathe. "What are you?" she whispered. Eli looked at his hand, at the skin he wore, at the shape he had taken. "Something you forgot," he said. "Something your ancestors tried to burn. But stories don't die, Laura. They sleep. They wait." The hallway lights flickered, and in the distance, something moved. Something large, slow, crawling across the hull of the shuttle from the outside. Something that didn't belong in this universe. Laura stepped back. Eli's voice was soft. "You should go now." And behind her, the walls began to crack. They opened the door, and something was waiting on the other side. It began with a sound. Not loud, not sharp. Just a soft, wet scraping, like something dragging its limbs across metal. Something with too many arms, too many eyes. Something old. The sound came from the outer hull, outside the sojourn, in space, which should have been impossible. Laura didn't move. She stood in the corridor frozen, the faint glow of emergency lights washing over her pale skin. Behind her, the tribunal chamber was silent now. No screams, no flickering symbols, no more diplomats, just Eli. He didn't move either. He stood at the edge of the door, one hand pressed gently against the wall, as if he could hear the ship breathing. Laura finally found her voice. "What did you do?" Eli didn't look at her. He kept his gaze on the wall, on the sound. "I remembered," he said softly. "And now they remember me." She didn't understand. None of it made sense. She had watched the tribunal dissolve, literally dissolve, their bodies unraveling into mist and dust, their voices fading mid-sentence. There was no logic to it, no science. And Eli, he wasn't human. Not really. "What are they?" she whispered. Eli closed his eyes. "Things we tried to forget," he said. "We called them myths, nightmares, warnings. But they were real. Once. And now they're awake again. I woke them." Outside, the scraping grew louder. Not one sound now. Many. Circling, the shuttle crawling across its surface, something vast, something hungry. Then came the knocking, a single bang against the outer door. Then again, and again. Steady, slow, rhythmic. Bang, bang, bang. "They want in," Eli said. Laura shook her head. "We're in space. There's nothing out there." "There can't be." Eli finally turned to her. His face was different now. Not in shape, but in feeling. Like the light around him had changed. Like he was being seen through a different kind of lens. The air around him felt heavier, older. "Space was never empty," he said. "We just forgot how to look." Across the shuttle, systems failed one by one, engines dead, gravity flickering, translation nodes shorting out, leaving passengers to scream in their own native tongues. All of them heard it now, the scraping, the knocking, the whispers, and the word burned into every screen: return. On Deck 7, a group of guards tried to reach the armory. They didn't make it. The hallway swallowed them, not with teeth, not with claws. It just folded, bent the wrong way. Like the corridor had become liquid, a twisting knot of angles and shadows. When it unfolded again, they were gone, and the lights were bleeding. Meanwhile, in the diplomatic wing, survivors gathered, a dozen species. Most trembling, some armed, all terrified. They had sealed the main conference hall, welding the doors shut, stacking furniture against the walls. One of the thrown bodyguards took command. Not Kalor. He was gone now. Turned to ash, or worse. The bodyguard's name was Kej. He had been raised in the bone pits of Thrakis, trained in war since childhood. He feared nothing. Until now. "We have to find the human," he growled. "He is the source. We remove him. We stop this." Others nodded, but one did not. An old Zalii monk stood apart from the others, eyes like dim embers. She whispered something strange. "We are already inside the story," she said. "Removal changes nothing. The ending was written long before. He arrived." They ignored her. Meanwhile, Eli and Laura moved through the lower decks. Laura's legs felt weak, her hands shook. But she stayed close. Part of her hated him, feared him, but another part knew. If anyone could stop this, it was him. "You said you remembered," she said quietly. "Remembered what?" He walked, slowly, his coat brushing against the metal wall. He spoke without turning. "What we did," he said. "What humans were, before we forgot, before we buried it." She didn't understand. "Humans aren't like this. We're not monsters." He stopped, looked at her. Not anymore. There was silence between them. Then slowly he lifted his hand, pressed it to a nearby control panel. It hissed open. Beyond it was a chamber no one remembered, a room that wasn't on the maps, black walls, a pit in the center, and, in the pit, movement. Not physical, not solid, just presence. Like something breathing in reverse, something not made of matter or light. "This ship," Eli said, "was built on the bones of something older. They didn't know. Or maybe they did. But they built it anyway, and I came to see if it was still here." He stepped toward the pit. The walls pulsed. Laura didn't follow. "What is it?" she asked. "A memory," Eli whispered. "A piece of us. What we were before language, before thought, before the lie." She shook her head. We're not evil." He looked at her gently. "No. Just incomplete." Suddenly, alarms blared, a new sound, rushing footsteps, shouting, weapons. Kez and the armed survivors had found them. They stormed the room, plasma rifles raised. "Step away from the pit," Kej snarled. "Now!" Eli didn't move. Kej fired. The bolt struck Eli in the chest. Eli staggered, but didn't fall. Instead, the air around him shimmered. His skin flickered, peeled, shifted. Not torn, not wounded, just releasing. Like the human form had been a mask. And now it was sliding off. Beneath it was something else. Not flesh, not bone. Just darkness. And eyes. Dozens of them. Hundreds. Watching. Not glowing. just aware. Kez screamed. He opened fire again, but the bullets vanished before they struck. The space between them folded, collapsed, warped into shapes the eye couldn't follow. The walls cracked. The pit opened, and from it rose a sound so old it had no name. The air twisted. Time flickered, and in that moment Laura saw it. What Eli really was. Not a god. Not a demon. Something worse. Something buried beneath both. A truth too big to be spoken. Something that once ruled and was cast out, and has waited in silence, and now with the door open it was coming back. The others fled. Tried to. But they had opened the door, and something was waiting on the other side. The walls are hungry now. They ran. They didn't scream. Not at first. That came later. First was the silence. A thick, swallowing silence that filled the halls like a fog. The kind that clings to your skin. The kind that listens. Watches. Waits. Kez ran until his breath turned to fire. Until his armor scraped and clanked and felt like a coffin wrapped around his chest. Behind him, the others scattered through the dim corridors of the Sojourn. No longer a shuttle, no longer a place of diplomacy or order. It had become something else, a maze of bending walls, shifting lights, and whispers. Always the whispers. They crawled through the vents, echoed in the floor, flickered through shattered screens. Not language. Not exactly. Just the sense of words. Like someone you forgot telling you something you were never meant to hear. Kez didn't look back. He remembered what he saw in that room, what the human had become, what lived beneath that skin. It wasn't possible. It wasn't fair. Humans weren't that powerful. They weren't that old. But then why did every part of his blood remember? Why did every ancient instinct inside him whisper one word? Kneel. He turned a corner and stopped. Not because he wanted to, but because the corridor was gone. It should have led to the engine deck. Instead, it opened into a room that should not exist. A bedroom. Not metal, not starborn. Wooden, not earth-built. Familiar. He stared. There were picture frames on the wall. A bookshelf, a bed, and a child's voice saying his name, softly, from under the bed. Kez. He stepped back. No one should know his name. Not like that. Not with that voice. Come under here, the voice whispered again. You'll be safe down here. Kez raised his weapon, aimed it at the bed. His hands were shaking. His memories were not. That was the voice of his little sister. But she had died in the ice pits of Thrakis 13 years ago. He buried her himself. Slowly, the bed began to rise. Something was underneath. It had too many arms and her face but stretched, grinning. Eyes too wide, too hollow. You left me, it said. Come stay now. Kez screamed and fired. The bullets didn't hit. They didn't miss either. They just disappeared. The room folded again, and he was gone. In the lower decks, Laura tried not to cry. She had seen people vanish, seen rooms bleed, seen time reverse and then forget itself. Her hands were numb, her voice gone, her sense of direction completely lost. She wandered the dark with Eli beside her, no longer hiding, no longer pretending to be human. He walked like something that had chosen not to destroy everything yet, but could. Anytime he wanted, the shadows moved around him, not away from him, toward him, like he was gravity, like he was truth. This ship's changing, Laura whispered. It's not just breaking down, it's turning into something else. Eli didn't answer. He ran a hand along the wall. It shimmered, beneath his touch, not like metal, more like skin. It's remembering, he said. She looked at him. Remembering what? What it was before it was a ship. Laura stopped walking. The hallway lights behind her flickered and died. That doesn't make sense, she said. It wasn't meant to, Eli said. They built this vessel using matter they found on a dead moon. It was old. It was buried. They thought it was harmless. Ancient stone. Harmless dust. He turned to her slowly. It wasn't stone, she whispered. What was it? He looked at her with those endless eyes. Me. Elsewhere, one of the surviving delegates, the Zali monk, sat cross-legged in the dark, humming a single broken note. Around her, a small circle of survivors held torches and crude weapons. They had carved a small space of silence, a pocket, of stability in the madness, but it wouldn't last. You were right, said one of the insectoid traders, voice thin and dry, about him. About the human. What is he? The monk opened her eyes. Not a human, she said. Then what? A wound, she whispered. Carved into the shape of a man. The survivors didn't speak, but outside the circle, the walls, rippled, hungry. Back with Eli and Laura, the pair stood before a massive door deep in the lowest deck. Eli had brought her here for a reason. What's behind it? She asked. The beginning, he said. She stared at the door. There were no controls, no hinges, just a wall of black, pulsing with faint lines of gold, like veins. Why did you come here, Eli? She asked softly. Why now? He touched the wall. Because the stars forgot, he said. And when enough minds forget the truth begins to die, and if it dies completely, it doesn't go quietly. The wall began to open. Laura stepped back. What's inside? Eli looked at her, and for the first time there was sadness in his voice. My name. She didn't understand, but when the door opened, the air turned cold. Inside was darkness, but not absence. Presence. Thousands of faint shapes. Sleeping, curled in silence. Waiting. Not alive. Not dead. Just waiting to be remembered. And when Laura stepped, too close she heard them, every one of them whispering her name. Not aloud. In her thoughts. In her blood. Come back to us. You were one of us. Once. She staggered back. Eli caught her. They're pieces of me, he said quietly. What was taken, what was broken, what they hid in this ship to keep me weak. He looked up at the ceiling. His voice trembled. Not with fear, with fury. But now they're waking, and in that moment the walls above them groaned. Not like metal, like bones. Somewhere else in the shuttle, someone screamed. Not because they were being attacked, because the hallway they were running through had teeth. The ship itself had turned against them. And it was hungry. Far above, on the command deck, a single emergency beacon managed to activate. Just one. It sent out a signal. Short, panicked, fragmented. Only one word was clear in the message. Not help, not attack. Just one name, Eli. His name was never supposed to be spoken. The signal was picked up by a deep listening relay orbiting the rim of the Mern Reach. It lasted 7 seconds, just long enough for one word to echo across 3 star systems. Eli. On a warship passing through the Sarn dust lanes, a throne general heard the name and froze. On a forgotten temple moon cloaked in ice, an old machine awoke and began to hum. On a dying world where no living thing had spoken in centuries, the stones began to bleed. All because of a name that should never have been remembered. On the shuttle, time was breaking, not slowing, not speeding. Breaking. Minutes looped. Seconds reversed. Memories cracked like mirrors dropped from orbit. Kez lay in a corridor that no longer connected to anything. His body was twisted, but he wasn't dead. He was speaking to someone. Or something. No one could see it but him. It wore his own face, smiled with his own teeth. It told him things he had buried. About the child he left behind on Thrakis. The one with the eyes like glass. The one he pretended had never been born. It told him that child was here now, somewhere in the ship, waiting, and it asked him why he ever thought he deserved to live. Kez began to weep. His tears turned to ash halfway, down his cheeks, Deep below, Laura sat in the dark with Eli. They hadn't spoken for minutes or hours. Time had lost shape down here. She stared at the shapes inside the chamber, the ones that whispered, the ones that called to her like lost family members, voices full of hunger and sorrow. "Why do they sound like people I know?" she asked. Eli sat with his back against the wall. He looked tired, not weak, just ancient, like a mountain might look after the last glacier has passed. "Because they are," he said. "Pieces of memory, fragments of soul. Every person who ever feared what I am left a piece of themselves behind. A warning, a story, a prayer." He looked into the chamber. "They became part of me. Not by choice, just by remembering." Laura swallowed. "This ship, it's alive now." "It always was," Eli said. "It just didn't know it. And now," he looked at her. Really looked. "Now it remembers." On the upper deck, the survivors gathered what was left of their courage. The Xelia monk had gone silent, sitting in the center of the room with her hands folded and her eyes closed. She whispered things under her breath. Not prayers, not spells, instructions, reminders. "If he speaks the name," she said, "the stars will turn inside out. Your memories will slip like skin, and the dark between galaxies will sing again." Someone asked what name she meant. She didn't answer. She only bled from the eyes and smiled. Outside the ship, something impossible happened. Something began to knock again. Not on the hull, on the space around it. Space doesn't have a surface, doesn't have a shell, and yet the knocking was loud, slow, boom boom boomas. If something was knocking on the idea of the ship, trying to come in through reality itself. On the bridge, the last working sensor flared to life. It displayed a shape beyond the ship. Massive, curved, wrong, not a vessel, not a creature, a scar, in space, a wound that had never healed, and through it something was reaching. Eli stood again. The chamber behind him pulsed, as if breathing. The figures inside stirred restlessly. "What are they waiting for?" Laura asked. Eli said nothing for a moment. Then, "A name. Yours?" He shook his head. "Not the one I wear now. The old one. The true one." He walked slowly toward the far wall, pressed his hand to it. A door opened, not to another room, but to somewhere else. A place that didn't belong in the ship or in any physical world. The floor was bone. The air was dust. The sky was made of screaming mouths, and across the horizon were monuments, thousands of them, built in the shape of a single human figure. Eli's figure. Laura stepped back. "What is this?" she whispered. "My home," Eli said softly. Once, she stared at him. "What are you?" He didn't look at her. He just stepped forward and said a word, one word, his true name. Laura didn't hear it, not with her ears. She felt it, like being drowned in boiling water, like choking on light, like every cell in her body trying to scream and forget and remember at the same time. She fell to her knees. The ship shuddered. Decks twisted, gravity reversed. Language stopped working. Screens melted. Fire rained upward. And outside the shuttle, the thing beyond the scar smiled, because now it remembered him too, and it was coming. Eli looked back at Laura. She was crying, but not in fear. In awe. "You weren't just a god," she said. "You were the one the gods feared." Eli nodded once. And now they remember why. They tried to seal the breach, but it had already opened inside them. They tried to close the doors. They welded the hatches, locked the decks, sealed the bridge, in 15 layers of magnetic code, but it didn't matter, because the breach wasn't just in the hull, it was inside their minds. On deck 4, 2 survivors stared at each other for what felt like hours. They were both trembling, not because they were afraid of each other, but because they weren't sure they were looking at someone real. One was a medic, the other, an interpreter from the Zoran Trade Ministry. They had names once, Now those names didn't matter. They sat against the wall, back to back, listening to the ship shift and breathe and whisper to itself. The medic spoke first. "I can't tell what's mine anymore." The interpreter didn't answer. "My memories," the medic continued, voice shaking. "They're folding, like paper. I can feel other lives slipping into mine. Dreams that aren't mine. Places I've never been. Languages I suddenly understand. And the name, it keeps trying to crawl into my mouth." The interpreter turned slowly. "Don't say it," he whispered. The medic looked at him. "Say what?" "His name." The medic didn't respond, but something behind his eyes began to glow. On the command deck, time had broken. Not stopped, just become untrustworthy. Every screen blinked with impossible data, a system map of the shuttle that kept changing shape, a list of crew members that now included the dead, and one blinking file marked Origin. When opened, it displayed only static, and one sentence. He was not born, he was removed. No one knew what that meant. No one wanted to know. The last surviving bridge officer, a Vili named Tren, sat in the captain's chair and gripped her own arms to stop them from trembling. She'd sealed herself in, but it didn't help. Because the voices were in the glass now. They whispered from reflections. They moved when she didn't. And when she blinked too long, she saw herself standing beside her own body, smiling, not cruelly, just knowingly, as if to say, "You've always been mine." Far below, in the chamber of statues, Laura stood alone. Eli had stepped through the door into the other place, and she had stayed behind. She didn't know why. Maybe because something inside her still wanted to believe it could be fixed. That this ship, this place, this reality, could be pulled back from the edge. But the chamber was changing now. The walls breathed. The statues, those thousands of human-shaped monuments, were turning their heads. Slowly, toward her. She felt them watching, not in anger, not even in judgment, just longing. Like they wanted her to remember something she'd never known. A voice behind her whispered, "You've always been here." She turned. No one. But her shadow was missing, and in its place, a shape. Thin, tall, curved wrong. Wearing her face, stretched, over something else, the shape smiled and said, "You never left." Laura ran. In the breach chamber, Eli stood at the center of something that wasn't space, wasn't time, just truth, unwrapped and bleeding. Before him stood the thing that had come through the scar. Not a god, not a beast. Just himself, multiplied, fractured, across 1,000 timelines. This was what had been cast out, sealed, hidden in myth. This was what the name had awakened. A self he had once been. The self they feared. And now it spoke. Not with words, but with gravity, thought, memory. And it asked him one question. "Why did you let them forget?" Eli answered without moving his lips. "Because they needed peace," the other self pulsed, "and now they will have nothing." Around them space cracked. Entire thoughts collapsed into light, and a single phrase repeated in every version of every language in the galaxy. "He is returned." Back on the ship, the survivors changed. Some forgot who they were entirely. Walked halls that didn't exist, opened doors into their own nightmares. Others merged, literally, hands becoming hands, skin melting into other skin, minds entangled in impossible knots of shared pain and memory. They became stories, not people, stories that screamed. Laura reached the top of the ship again. Every step forward took something from her. A name, a memory, a feeling. She wasn't sure if she was even still Laura anymore. But she kept moving. The walls bent to make way for her, not because they feared her, but because they recognized her. She reached the command deck, opened the door, found Tren dead in the captain's chair. Her eyes had become mirrors. In them, Laura saw herself smiling, not kindly, just truthfully. Behind her, the glass shattered. Eli had returned. He was no longer cloaked in skin, no longer walking, just being. His shape flickered like fire, remembering how to burn. "It's done," he said. His voice was all voices. The air twisted. The stars outside changed color, and every ancient race that had watched humanity rise and called them weak now remembered why their ancestors once built temples of fear around Earth. Laura stepped forward. Her face was wet with tears. "What happens now?" she asked. Eli looked at her, and for the first time, his voice softened. "You wake up." The stars blinked. The shuttle folded inward, and every passenger remembered their death at the same time. Except her. Except Laura. The shuttle is gone. But something came back with her. They found her drifting near the edge of the veiled halo, weeks after the emergency beacon had gone silent. Alone. Weightless. Unharmed. No shuttle. No crew. Just her. Floating in space, unconscious, wrapped in a thin veil of static and soft blue light. No oxygen supply. No life support. Just her, untouched by the vacuum, as if the universe itself had chosen not to disturb her sleep. They brought her aboard the Resolute Dawn, a diplomatic patrol ship, 3 systems away from where the Sojourn had disappeared. The crew scanned her. No wounds, no radiation, no data implants. Just a name in her wristband tag. Laura Ellen, civilian technician. Level 3. Status presumed dead. The ship's doctor, a Holland hybrid named Sar, watched her for 36 hours. She didn't wake. But her brain activity was wrong. Too fast, too deep. Dreaming in layers, Sar couldn't follow. Once, during the 3rd night, she whispered something in her sleep. A name. Not loud. Not even audible, really. Just a vibration. A memory that crawled across the metal walls and whispered itself to the doctor in the dark. Sar didn't know what the name meant, but it made her hands shake, and the lights in the med bay dimmed for 13 seconds after that. When Laura finally opened her eyes, she didn't scream. She didn't move. She just stared at the ceiling and whispered, "You left the door open." No one knew what she meant. Not yet. A galactic inquiry was launched immediately. The Sojourn, a fully staffed diplomatic shuttle, had vanished without trace. No wreckage, no distress logs, no witnesses. Just one lone survivor, and a psychic scar stretching 40,000 kilometers across the space where the shuttle had last been tracked. Scanners could not penetrate it. Probes came back blind. Some didn't come back at all. They called it the silent burn. No one knew what it was. Except her. Laura didn't speak much. When questioned, she gave vague answers. There was a breach, she'd say. We remembered something we weren't supposed to. It was already inside us. Officials thought she was traumatized, delusional. They ran tests, brain scans, interrogations. But something was wrong. When people spent too much time in the room with her, they changed, not visibly. Not immediately, but their dreams turned strange. Their memories became unreliable. One officer swore his dead wife had called him on the comms. Another walked into a wall and kept walking, as if the wall would eventually forgive him. One tried to open the airlock, said there was someone outside waiting for him, and all of them eventually said the same thing. I hear him when it's quiet. On the 12th day, Laura stood, not walked, just stood, like gravity had remembered she existed. She walked through the halls of the Resolute Dawn, silent, barefoot, eyes forward. The crew stepped aside, not out of fear, out of instinct. She wasn't glowing, wasn't floating, wasn't anything strange, but they felt something behind her eyes, something watching through her, like she had brought back not just memories, but a piece of him. A single transmission was later found in the ship's logs, recorded automatically by a hallway comm drone. The video was blurry, the timestamp was wrong, but the audio was clear. It was her voice, standing in front of the ship's Forward viewport, staring into the stars, she said, "You asked what he was. You asked why he didn't fight back, why he waited, why he let the stories fade. But the truth is, he didn't want to come back. He wanted to rest. But we wouldn't let him. We kept digging. We kept reaching. We pulled him out of the dark. And when he came, he didn't come alone." Behind her, the lights began to flicker, and a faint shape moved across the stars. Not a ship, not a creature, just a crack in the sky. A scar that had never closed. And from it, something watched. They tried to silence the video, but it was too late. Within days, fragments of the name spread across the network. Some called it a joke, others called it a virus. A few whispered the name aloud. They didn't speak again after that, not because they died, but because they weren't the same people anymore. Their eyes glowed faintly in the dark, and they began to draw, not pictures, not symbols, maps. Maps of places no one had ever seen, maps of structures too large to fit inside, a universe. And one phrase written again and again in every known language: "He remembers you." Laura disappeared 3 days later. No escape pod, no signature, no trace. Her quarters were clean, except for a single message scratched into the metal floor. Beneath her bed, "The shuttle is gone, but I'm still the door." The Resolute Dawn was found weeks later, floating and empty. All 142 crew gone, but the engines still running. The walls were covered in fingerprints. Not blood, not paint, just impressions, like thousands of hands had pressed, gently into the metal, over and over, like they were praying or welcoming something in. And the last log ever sent from the ship, received by a relay station near the dying moon of Cairn Station, was this: "He sat alone on the shuttle. We tried to make him leave, but it was never a shuttle, and he was never alone."